Life isn't about finding yourself. Life is about creating yourself. That was George Bernard Shaw. Confucius said, if you make a mistake and do not correct it, this is called a mistake. He also said, man is not great because he hasn't failed. Man is great because his failure hasn't stopped him. And Winston Churchill said, success is going from one failure to another without the loss of enthusiasm. So, today on the Airing Out podcast, we are talking about failure. Something I have a long-standing relationship with that we hope to unpack a little bit here. So during the time that I was ill, I was incredibly critical of myself. I wanted things to be a way that they weren't, and the way that they weren't was, successful. Things weren't going right, and I hated that they weren't going right, or they weren't going the way that I wanted them to. So I kind of not only resented the fact that they weren't going well, but also myself for being responsible for that. And I know now in retrospect that, I wasn't entirely to blame. I did have an illness, and it would develop and take time to, overcome. But during that time, every mistake that I made, every time that I didn't do right, I kind of branded myself with like a stamp of failure. I was the first one to be completely resolute in saying, you didn't do it right, you were wrong, that was a mistake, you failed. And I felt that that was almost a burden. It was my responsibility to bear that burden because I was the one that did it. I was trying to be accountable for the things in my life. I'm sure if I did well, I would have tried to have been accountable for those things as well, but the majority of the things that were happening in my life were not successful. And I don't know what it was, but I thought there was some kind of good reason in being accountable for that. So for one of the things that definitely perpetuated my illness, made it worse, turned that anxiety into depression, was the kind of, it wasn't so much a comfort, but it was the easy answer to my problems. Rather than saying it's an illness, it's something that perhaps I cannot control. It's more so that I'm the one that's in control of my actions. I'm responsible for how I think and how I feel. And then it's taking a look at that, and it turns out that's pretty fucking dire. So yeah, that's a lot of where my resentment came from as well. The fact that I kept seeing everything that I did as my fault, as my problem, as my own behaviours and my choices. And it took an incredibly long time. I still don't think I've completely overcome the idea that, I completely accepted the idea that I was ill. While some of it might have been, yeah, sure, I have my own free will and I can act in a certain way and be responsible for that. I did have an illness. It was a condition that was infecting my mind in the way that I thought, feel and behaved. So there's only so much of it that I can take responsibility for. But my point is that kind of thought process, that responsibility, that accountability was so prevalent throughout that time, and I was so critical and I was so hard on myself for how things were, that failure has become a really massive part of my journey, for lack of a cliche word. It was such an underlying thing, a source of pain and a source of poor mental behaviour back then, that it's taken years and years to unpack and to kind of understand and accept. And I'm hoping that today we can do a little bit of that, and it might be a little bit of a cathartic process for me because I get to go over it and talk about my relationship with failure, but also talk about the things that I've learned. I can remember one of the biggest events was during my first year of college, having had that traumatic experience after leaving high school that I've mentioned on the podcast before, and then my mental health just slowly deteriorating. I tried to take that year at college, but it was very, very fucking difficult. I didn't speak to anybody. I kept myself to myself. I was incredibly scared of everything that was happening around me. I was scared of talking to people. I was putting so much pressure on myself. I was incredibly unhappy in my own time. And it got to the point where I was in therapy. I was speaking to doctors. And my lecturers and my parents said the best thing going forward is for you to probably take some time and start again next year. And this was just at the beginning of the final project, so it was about 10 weeks out from the end of the year. I was planning my final project. I had ideas, I was writing them down and, thinking about preparations. But as much as I may wanted to have carried on, I knew that it wasn't right to. I knew that I ought to come back with a better mindset, and give myself that time to breathe, that time to alleviate some of that pressure I was putting myself under, and kind of get away, process and heal from all of that pain. Oh, but my fuck, I thought I was such a failure. In my own mind, everybody around me told me that, reassured me of the decision that was being made was the right one, and in retrospect it was. But I couldn't help but consider myself such a letdown. The fact that I wasn't able to carry on, the fact that I had to quit, it wasn't quitting, but I had to give up and stop before I get into the finish line. It was definitely a matter of pride. Pride was a massive part of that thought process, but that is what it is. But that was probably the biggest instance. From that point on up to starting it again, I think I carried that shame with me. And that was another reason, another contributing factor as to why I didn't hold myself in the highest regard. I've always taken failure, making mistakes, and not doing something right incredibly personally. Beforehand, that was kind of how I was. That was what I set myself up to being. And yeah, I was very, very quick to hold myself accountable, even though it wasn't always my fault. I do so now, but it's a bit of a different kind of motivation behind that reaction, in that I take it personally because I want to do well, I want to succeed, I want to do things right, that when I don't, that kind of halt in progress towards the thing which I really want, I see that as things aren't working right, something's not happened, we are no longer moving forward. That's wrong, that's not good. And yeah, it's difficult to let that halt in progress not become something more than it needs to be. Don't stop for too long and acknowledge it, and rather than just carrying on. Oh, this is already pretty dire. It won't be this dire for the rest of the episode, I promise. I got a shirt. It was an exercising shirt when I began to exercise. It was from a brand called Icarus Clothing, and they were local to Dorset. I've tried looking for them since, and it was a like a veteran funded brand, because they did pictures of Lulworth Cove, and I've looked for them since, but they no longer exist, which is a real shame, because I hold this shirt in it's very sentimental to me. It's a very sentimental shirt, and on that shirt is written big and bold in the front of it, "Willing to fail." And I got this when I decided that I wanted to exercise a little bit more, and willing to fail, big and bold, it was definitely a statement. It was definitely a statement, but it wasn't something that I could wear without at least taking on the words that were written on it. And it taught me a great many things, just kind of having this there, having it kind of floating around and bobbling about my head. And why would you voluntarily choose to fail? Why was that something that you would do? Why would you want to not succeed? But the thing that I learned at that time was that the willingness to fail was that the more willing you are, the more that you'll end up learning. The more open you are to making mistakes, then the more that you can kind of progress forward from them, rather than not go to the point where you're confronting perhaps doing something wrong. Years ago, in my first journal, like at the back of it, I had things which I'd written down. You know, I was philosophy had very much become a valuable part of my journey towards getting better, and so I think naturally, with my love for writing, I would sometimes write things of my own. And once I wrote them, it stuck out like a sore thumb, because I wrote it down. I knew it was right, but at that time in my life, and for a very long time after, even to an extent up to now, I didn't know what it means. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I couldn't make sense of this thing which I knew was right. It was so short and brief, but so profound in what it meant. I couldn't deny it, but at the same time, I had a hard time, not so much accepting it, but understanding it. And that was, failure is a gift. And when I wrote that down when I was younger, I was just like, what the fuck? Like, yeah, weird. I'm still getting used to it now. I still look back at it now and think how scrambled my head was over looking at this thing. Yeah, failure is a gift. A gift is something that you receive which has affection and sentimentality in it. So how is failure, not succeeding, making mistakes, not doing well, ever possibly a gift? I don't know, it's for some it's so short, it feels like there's a lot to unpack and a lot to kind of get your head around. Okay, when I was at uni, well, I mentioned on the podcast before, my experience with uni was a bit weird. I did 2 years of an undergraduate degree, and then I had to do one more to get my degree, but all the places that offered the 1 year weren't much to write home about. So I contacted a university which were known for film and media, and they said, yes, we will have you on, but we will need you to do the second year of uni again. I was like, bite the bullet, more education, a little bit more expensive, but probably worth it in the long run. First year was COVID, bit of a ball ache, but that's neither hither nor thither today. But the fourth year of my degree was the first and last year at university. So I made it a bit of a thing for myself. You know, I wanted to really make the most of it. It was my 1 year away from home after having lived 6 or 7 years sheltered and kind of isolated within my own existence at home, not really having the tools or the capability to go too far beyond without getting myself into a bit of a mess. We took that into account because the place that I went to wasn't too far away, so that if anything did happen, I wouldn't be too far away. Because something actually did before when I finished college, I tried to go away to Brighton, to a film school there. I wasn't ready, and I got left there. Mum and Dad left, and I had a complete mental breakdown, like probably the biggest mental breakdown that I've ever had. Unfortunately, that's not something that you kind of move on from easily. I still remember vividly how it happened and how I felt and what happened. So when thinking about going away for this first and final year, it was a consideration. It was definitely something that we took into consideration. The fact that the potentiality of it, regardless of how I was always there. When I got there, like I said, I wanted to maximise the opportunity. First and last year at uni, I wanted to do everything big, social life, embracing living independently. Final year at university, wanted to do well. And so what I wanted to do there as well was confront the 3 things that I was afraid of. You know, I'd taken the leap, spread my wings a little bit, and I was going to use that opportunity to do some of the things which I thought would only further liberate me from who and what I was when I was living at home those previous years. And those 3 things, I've thought about this, I'm going to have to say them. No, but I want to say them, I want to be open, were water, women, and failure. Make of that what you will. I've nearly died a couple times in water, so that's always been a bit traumatic for me. Women, that's the one I thought, yeah. Up until that point, I didn't have any positive relationships with women. They were all negative, and they all came from a time in my life where I was so critical of myself, where I wanted relationships, but I was never equipped. So, and for some reason, the same thing kept happening again and again, and it left me really hurt every single time. So I was very scared of opening myself back up again, and I've spoken about how I shoved my heart deep down to me, and that was part of the reason why I wanted to dig it back up and give it life again. So yeah, I was afraid of women, so what, shut up. And failure. I was afraid of failure because I had such embedded kind of self-resentment and punishment around not doing things right, not doing things well, and putting myself to blame for things. I faced that failure throughout that year. I managed to overcome, or at least contribute, each of those fears in some regard, which was positive outcome. But the way that I faced failure was in my work. I wanted to do the best that I could, but in some of the projects I gave everything that I had to every project, but in some of them still I didn't do well. Like, I didn't do well for this, that and the other reason, despite giving to it, and that hurt. That really hurt, that I'd given so much of myself to this project, but it came back to me, and it wasn't what they were after. It wasn't so much the fear of success which scared me. It was the fear of giving my all to something and really putting my heart and soul into it, and then having it come back and be like, this isn't actually that great, you know. I remember it happened with one of the projects. It was my writing style which fucked me up on that one, but I got such a low mark, and I was just like, I gave so much to this thing, but it wasn't stopping there and being like, oh well, I'm not going to do that again. Well, I've tried it, fucked it up, and I'm not going to try and do well again, in the fear that it might not go well. The way that I faced that was taking aboard what I'd been learned, kind of realising the opportunity of what I had when I was there. It's my last year at uni, first year, blah, blah, blah. But it was the last chance to make something good of the opportunity that I had. I wasn't going back to uni, I wasn't going to do a master's, I was fucking done with education at that point, so this was it. This was making it happen. And it was about realising that opportunity and stepping up to the plate. Something else which was really massive for me was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor E. Frankl. And I was actually having a look through my journals this morning, and I came across something that I'd written about it, which I thought might be interesting to share. Let's have a look. Yeah, here we go. Okay. A few minutes. No, we'll go with this one. Okay. So this was the day after I handed in my final project at uni ever. No, wait, shit. This was a few days after. I did an entry where I referenced it on the day where I handed in the big project, but this was a few days after, when I'd finished that book. I finished the part of Viktor E. Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning when he speaks about the 3 stages of a prisoner's psychology. So Viktor E. Frankl was in Auschwitz. He was a Jew who along with many of the people that he knew or were a part of his religion, were herded into concentration camps and systematically abused and had their human rights completely done over, for lack of a better word. He spoke to the people. He shared a hut with, and how, despite the circumstances, there were those who had it worse. A concept difficult to perceive, but it was his belief. It was the people who, when suffering the attrition of their very being, who began to give up and lose hope, who would perish and die as a result. He quoted Nietzsche's, "Those who have a why can endure almost any how." And it was the small belief found within oneself which saw them to survival and life on the other side of camp life. Those who, as Albert Camus said, have within them an invincible summer. On the other side of a great feat, a challenge spanning long and demanding, much with my entire life ahead of me, I am recognizing the unparalleled strength and significance of the indomitable human spirit. So this is a reading from the day that I handed in my graduate project, the big one that I committed so much of myself to, day in, day out. It's titled "The Day" on the 19th of the 5th, 22. Today I did it. After 4 years I'd completed my degree. A day early, no less. It has been no small effort. I wanted this unit to be the crowning achievement of my studies, and I'm proud of what I've done. I've worked hard since February the 1st, and I put in the hours and pushed for something better out of myself. And what have I got to show for my efforts? An academic essay that is an improvement on every one that I've ever done, and a screenplay that contains a true piece of me. That is a true expression of my voice. I read a few minutes ago, "Someone looks down on each of us in difficult hours, and they would not expect to be disappointed. They would not expect to disappoint them. They would hope to find us suffering proudly, not miserably, knowing how to die." And that was Viktor Frankl. I bear the fruits of my suffering. I know how I have made everyone that I promised proud. So yeah, that was a piece from that book, on basically facing that failure. If you give yourself a why, and I think it was that idea of the people who are no longer with us now, or even the people that are with us now but not directly with us, if they were looking down upon us, would the suffering that you're enduring make them proud? And I think that was really something which kind of drove me to do better for myself, but also for them, or do better for myself through them. Right. So this is an interesting one. During my first fight, I was pretty fucking miserable. It was the middle of November. The weather was pretty horrid, almost as horrible as how I was feeling. I was just pushing myself, punishing my body, because I thought this is what I had to do. It was a compulsion. There was hardly a part of me that wanted to do it. It's doing it because I had to do it. Again, putting myself under a lot of pressure. But I thought, I was sick of my thoughts, sick of being with myself all day, every day, and I kind of wanted to get away with it. So I don't listen to music when I go running. I just kind of have my own head to keep me company, and that can be good. There are definitely instances where that can be a positive thing, but in that state of mind that I was in, it was not. So I put on some motivational videos because my friend had recommended the Arnold Schwarzenegger ones for lifting weights and stuff, and I put on one about Kobe Bryant because I'd heard his mythos, as it were, he was a pretty cool dude. So I put him on, and yeah, I was pretty blown away, not only at how dedicated he was to what he did, but the extent that he pushed himself to succeed. But he spoke about failure, and he was just like, failure doesn't even exist. I was like, huh? What? Like, failure doesn't exist. If on Monday you have a shocking day and you don't do good and you fail at something, then, you get up Tuesday and you can have another go. And it kind of put into perspective the fact that failure isn't final. This thing which had been a burden, I'd been putting a burden on myself for years, isn't actually that big of a deal. And a way that I can relate that is to my second fight, which wasn't too long ago. I watched a video of an MMA fighter, Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, talking about getting knocked out. And I spoke to my coach at the time about it. You go into a fight and the worst case scenario is you get knocked out. That's the last thing any fighter wants to do. It's a lot of what fighters fight in preparation to not have happen. But worst case scenario, in that situation, high octane, high intensity, high pressure situation, the worst thing that could happen, so what? He's a professional fighter, and he said, if you get knocked out, you get knocked out. The worst thing that happens is, your family is still there, your friends are still there, your family still love you, and your friends still love you. So in that regard, the things which really deeply matter to you the most haven't changed. So failure doesn't stop. The world doesn't stop if you don't do something right. If you've got something which is really important to you and you really want to succeed to it and you don't, you're still going to wake up tomorrow. You're still going to have loved ones around you who love you, and you're still going to have another opportunity to either try again or try something different. So understanding and appreciating that for me was pretty important. I spent so many years trying to overcome this idea of failure, or trying to accept my own kind of failure and my attitude towards it, and then overcoming it, only to have Kobe Bryant then kind of flip that on its head and be like, well, it doesn't even exist really anyway. So yeah, that one was a real spanner in the works for me. All right, and the last instance in my timeline of failure was recently on my BSA course for the fire service. I noticed that at the start of the second week, the whole thing was condensed into 2 weeks. We'd been told from other people who'd done it years ago that it used to be an 8-week course, or it used to be a 12-week course. Well, we were doing the whole thing in 2 weeks, and holy fuck, there was so much information. There was so much information to take on board in the mornings in presentations, and then usually it was putting something into practice into the afternoon. So you not only had the information, but you then had the practice of it. And then sometimes it was doing one thing, doing something different later. And oh my God, it was so much to process, so much to keep on board, so much to retain. And again, it's something that was really important to me, and I really wanted to do well and to succeed at it. I tried not to put myself under too much pressure because, I can, at this point in my life, I can kind of anticipate that is something that I will do if it's something that I want to succeed at. And I did my best. I revised despite how long the days were. I paid attention, I focused, didn't put myself under too much pressure. Sure, I was analytical sometimes. That came up in my report, that sometimes a little bit over analytical with things. But that was just trying to do the best that I can, creeping back in. What I learned was, as hard of a lesson as it was at the beginning of the second week, was that I learned by making mistakes. And that was a fucking tough pill to swallow, because here I was in the thick of doing something that was really important to me, that was really mentally and physically demanding. And I realised that the way that I learn is by fucking up. It was difficult. Because you don't want to make a mistake, you don't want to make a twat of yourself, you don't want to do something wrong, but at the same time, not doing something wrong can oftentimes be the best teacher. Not doing something wrong highlights the importance of perhaps doing it right, and the fact of what could happen if you don't do it right in the first place. It was a really bitter pill to swallow, because I kind of had to accept that. I had to accept that if I want to learn, if I want to do well at this, I'm going to have to kind of welcome those mistakes. And that was really difficult. It taught me, it kind of forced humility onto me. I had to take it on the chin. Like, okay, whether I like it or not, this is how I learn. I got to embrace that, move forward, and try not to beat myself up about it. There was a day where I think it was the day after, I realised that in the afternoon we were doing ladder drills, and I kept doing something wrong which would have jeopardised the safety of my team. Taking your foot, the downward pressure off the jack beam when lifting the 13.5. You know what I mean, don't you? I kept doing it. I did it once, so I said, fuck. I did it again. I said, fuck. And I did it a third time. And I had to bite my tongue because I knew that I couldn't shout fuck as loudly as I wanted to on the yard when I was trying to be professional. And I went back into the classroom and I spoke to him. I told him, I said, I'm trying not to beat myself up because I'm trying to accept that this is how I learn. And it was then that I saw that quote from Winston Churchill that I read earlier, in that success is going from one failure to another without the loss of enthusiasm. You can make mistakes, you can make one after the other. Sometimes it might take 3 to learn your lesson, but so long as you don't let making those mistakes stop you from giving it a go, from wanting to succeed and wanting to overcome that mistake, then that's what really matters. Right, so why am I talking about this? Why am I trying to say that we should accustom ourselves with failure? Why bother? What's the point? And when trying to answer this question, I found myself becoming a little bit existential. I have a tendency to do that. You might have noticed. But I thought I don't want to kind of impose my beliefs on you. So I thought, why don't I ask the opposite? Or why don't you imagine the opposite? What if you never did take those risks? What if you never did put yourself in the position where you might not do something right, you might not succeed, you might make a mistake? Imagine a life where you never tried to make a mistake, or you were always too. Let me try that again. So why bother? Why accustom yourself with failure? What's the point? Why am I talking about any of this? And I tried asking myself that question, but I realised I was getting a bit existential about it, and I don't want to push my beliefs onto you. So I thought, why don't we imagine the opposite? Why don't we imagine a life where someone is too afraid to make a mistake? Someone is so afraid of failure that they never even try to begin with, or the reaction of failure is enough, so much so that they decide to live within a life of comfort. So it's a life of comfort, safety, and as far from fear as you can be. But as nice as that may sound, some of you may be like, yeah, that sounds all right. It's not realistic. Life happens, shit happens, and so does change. I've mentioned it before. My dad said the only inevitability in life, or the one constant more so, is change. And if you've chosen to live that life of comfort, of safety, of security, life is still going to happen. You're still going to have a loss in the family. You're still going to be hit by something which you're going to need to deal with. And if you're living that life, how well prepared are you going to be when the storm hits? How well equipped to deal with those things are you going to be if what you've done is try and hide away from willingly having that thing a part of your life? Because whether you like it or not, it's going to happen. And there was a quote from Jordan Peterson, and I mentioned the idea about a loss in a family deliberately because that's something that none of us can avoid, unfortunately. He said, "It is necessary to be strong in the face of death, because death is intrinsic to life. It is for this reason that I tell my students, aim to be the person at your father's funeral that everyone, in their grief and misery, can rely on. There is a worthy and noble ambition, strength in the face of adversity. Don't live in a bubble. Don't seclude yourself to safety away from the realities of life. Because whether you like it or not, life will happen. Life will happen to you and sometimes at you. And yeah, I personally think that it's a better way of life to experience and exist in a way that you're ready for when it does happen. And I thought this was a good one. 2 quotes. They I've known of them, but their relation semi-deliberate. Hunter S. Thompson said, "So we shall let the reader answer this question for himself, in this case, the listener. Who is the happier man? He who has braved the storm of life and lived, or he who has stayed securely on the shore and merely existed?" And from John A. Shedd, "A ship is safe in harbour, but that's not what ships are made for." So 2 very boaty references. So I know that is pretty dire. Today, dire is the word that I'm using. But let's have a look at the other side of the coin. You know, we've had what happens when life happens at you, with grief, with loss, with all the shit that you need to be prepared for in life. But the other side of life, the other side of the coin, is that you've been given a gift. You know, you're here. The numbers were very unspecific, but it is somewhere between 10 and 100 million of those sperm cells. It was you that made it. You were that one sperm cell out of that really inconsistent number of millions of sperm cells that is here today. You have air in your lungs, you have blood in your veins, and you have a beat in your heart. You're alive. And I think, on one hand, it would be a shame under those circumstances, under the odds that we are presented, just to be here. On one hand, it would be a bit of a shame to see that gift go unrealised, but alternatively, wouldn't you want to know what opportunities you could realise, what your potential could be, and what you could do with the gift that you've been given? What could you make out of your life, given the odds that you've had to overcome just to be here? And the way that I think about it is the reason behind the why I do some of the things that I do. And I justify it to myself, and sometimes it doesn't always sound or feel right, but I do it because there are those that can't. There are those that are unable to do the things that I'm doing. And I think if I were in that position, I wouldn't want to see somebody who has every potential to do the things which I physically can't, not choose to do those things. I want to try and make the most out of my life, because I know that there are people who, by no fault of their own, can't. And I wouldn't want to see what I have and what I've been given go to waste. So what is it I'm trying to say? Well, firstly, don't get to the point in your life where you look back in regret and realise that it's too late to do anything about it. You have it within you now. If you want to do something, now is the best time to start. It'll always be the best time to start. Yeah, anything you want to do, you can start now. And if you want to do something, if you want to act, if you want to, let's say like this, if in life we're going to make a series of mistakes, whether we like it or not, I think a good start would be finding something that you want to do. Because if we're going to make those mistakes, learn and grow from them, then why not pick something that you want to do? Sure, if it's anything like me, if you pick something that you want to do, making those mistakes will be a lot harder. But I can assure you that if you do make mistakes at something that you love and that you want to do, then you'll not only grow into that thing more, but you'll find that process far more rewarding and enjoyable, having it been something that you feel is right. Something that now I'm looking back in kind of retrospect, I haven't kind of touched on, which is strange. Making mistakes, failure, if you choose to subscribe to that actually being a thing. I don't know if I do now. I still don't. It confuses me, and I don't think I've quite forgiven Mr. Bryant for it. Making mistakes, not succeeding, giving it a go. Although it can be punishing, it can wound your pride, it can hurt, it can make you not want to do it again. I can guarantee that with those mistakes, if you prescribe an eagerness to do right on those mistakes, as Confucius said, what was it he said? Just to be specific, if you make a mistake and do not correct it, this is called a mistake. So if you're willing to do those things, if you're willing to make those mistakes, if you're not afraid to do something wrong in order to learn how to do it right, then I think that's the one that we want to try and avoid. But it's from making those mistakes that you learn. It's from those mistakes that you grow. And I don't know of what nobler a cause there is than to try and grow ourselves as individuals. And if you're picking something that you want to do, that growth only becomes twofold, because it's something that means something to you. And I wanted to end just by saying this: failure and mistakes are inevitable, but while they are a part of the equation equals growth. Right. Thank you for listening. I know that was a lot. I hope it wasn't too awful. Yeah, we'll see you next time. Appreciate you being here. Appreciate your time. Got some exciting things coming. I hope you stay tuned for them. This has been a Common Bird production.